Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very special guest named Tina, and she has spent 20 years in math education. And today she is going to talk to us about some of the reasons modern math requirements are not serving all students. But before we get there, I would love to know, Tina, what was your biggest struggle as a teacher?
So I was tasked to teach Algebra 1 to freshmen, and I'll tell you a little more about that program. But the biggest shock to me was how lacking in basic skills the students were. I mean, it was very sad, and it was hard to deal with. They didn't know their times tables. They didn't understand decimals or fractions. They didn't know the algorithm sometimes for multiplying, say 3 digits by 2 digits or long division. So all these baseline skills were missing. And the program I was in, it was administered and run by really wonderful, well-meaning teachers and administrators. The premise was that students who didn't take algebra would not succeed in life because that was called the gateway class for getting into college. So in the 90s and I'd say the early 2000s, I think it's just been recently that we're looking at attending college a bit differently than we used to. But the school that I worked at wanted to have all kids college ready by the time they graduated. So they felt that what they needed to do was to have all the students take Algebra 1 as freshmen, even though their skill levels really weren't there. So that was a huge challenge. Interestingly, when it came time to issue grades, we were allowed to give grades for different classes. Even though we were teaching the same material, we could give a grade for general math, pre-algebra, algebra 1. So in that essence, kids could still earn a credit for graduation, but then they could re-enroll in that class as a sophomore. So it was, I don't know if I want to say it was a good idea. It was a well-meaning idea because they really want to see these kids not become a permanent underclass. And I think as the years have gone by, I've seen a greater and greater push to really try to get kids into advanced math classes. And not everyone likes math. I mean, I love it. It's been my favorite for decades. But as a teacher, you have to look at the whole student. You're not, yes, you have, especially at the high school level, you have your content area, but you can see how these students, these 14-year-olds are trying to, grow into becoming adults, and they're developing interest. And it's not always math. It's not always advanced math. And I often felt as a teacher, I was trying to cram down, okay, we're going to derive the quadratic formula. We're going to factor this trinomial and all, do this word problem, all those things. And, some of these kids were never going to use that. And there's a lot to be said for the thinking that develops with math, that analytical thinking. I've also taught the SAT and ACT prep classes, and I see a lot of analytical thinking that goes into writing an essay or proper grammar. So there's more than one way to get to that goal. But I did find that to be trying, and I did my job. I had to do my job, but I really didn't always feel 100% behind it because, I'll never forget one thing one student said to me. Years ago, I was teaching a class for seniors who really hadn't done that well in math, but they needed one more math credit to graduate. So we would put them in a class. It was, I think it was called like topics in math or something like that. And so we would teach them all sorts of little things, just trying to sew up all these loose ends. Okay, we're going to solve an equation. We're going to find the area of this, couple word problems. And thinking that, okay, if they do go on to college, they're going to at least, now that they're seniors, their brains have developed a bit more, maybe we'll kind of sew up some of those loose ends. But one girl, her name was Emily, and I don't remember, and I wouldn't say her last name, but I think that I'm just mentioning it because it demonstrates what an impression it made upon me. She said to me, "Oh, I'm just not good at math." She said, "I'm just going to have to clean people's houses for a living." And I mean, I didn't know what to say. I said, oh, I encourage you, Emily, you're going to do okay. We're just going to take, I think it was a test day or something like that. It really hit home with me that maybe what I've been thinking isn't so false. I've often thought that one of the reasons we have pushed students unwittingly to some degree into advanced math when they had other talents in life that they should have, in my opinion, been pursuing, is because it's easy to say to those students afterwards, we can say, oh, well, we gave you all these opportunities. You could have done better in high school. You could have gone to college. You didn't do those things when you had the opportunity. Now I'm sorry, you just have to work at this low-wage job, because our economic system almost demands that we have probably 40% of our people who are out there working, earning less than they can live off of. And so there were times when I felt complicit in that unwitting goal, that goal that perhaps was unwittingly come to, derived.
There's so many great things that you just said that I find really interesting. I'm wondering, do you think requirements like Algebra 1 and 2 should be removed completely from the high school curriculum and from graduation requirements? And I'm also wondering if you think tests like the SAT and the ACT should also change their math requirements.
Oh, I probably yes to both of to answer that. Going back many decades when I was in school, students could graduate from high school without taking algebra. And I think it would be better for students to just know how to do fractions, know how to work with decimals, understand long division. And people think, oh, long division, I can just use a calculator. Long division requires a lot of critical thinking, especially when you're only 12 or 13 years old. People's brains develop at different rates, and some are more ready than others at various points in time. So I don't think it's really serving some students to be pushed into those advanced math classes. I would hope that there might be some encouragement just for the critical thinking that can evolve in them. And I would almost advocate more for maybe a class called critical thinking that perhaps took a bunch of little math topics, or just dissecting a sentence where your subordinate clauses are and things like that. It probably sounds a little strange, but there's a lot of critical thinking that goes on in just writing a paragraph or an essay. And with regards to the SAT and ACT, I mean, it kind of depends on what the colleges are looking for. I do think we've had too much of a push for everyone to go to college, because there are a lot of things out there that don't need you to spend 4 years of your life, often taking things you're not that interested in, costing a lot of money. So I would say whatever colleges are interested in, they should do what they want to do. I don't know if I have a strong opinion upon it. I do have a bit of opinion upon the work that I did for 16 years teaching test prep classes. I enjoyed them because it felt like just pure learning and analyzing, and I was with the kids. I had smallish classes, sometimes 10 or 20, never more than 20 we capped out. And the kids were highly motivated. I mean, a few of them, their parents were making them go, but the majority of them, they were motivated. And, we had a lot of fun, I would say, if you can believe that. Didn't have to worry about grades. So just from a learning standpoint, that was really enjoyable. But there was another side of me that always thought to myself, well, the reason these kids are here is because their parents had enough money to enroll them. And actually, the program I worked in was it wasn't that expensive at all. It was administered through a lifelong learning program through a local school district. So we kept our costs very low. But nevertheless, they had to be transported there. The parents had to take time to sign them up, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an entire group of students who will never have that opportunity to take this course. And I'm not going to say, I think it's reasonable to expect kids' grades, or not grades, but scores would increase I would always say you should really expect between 10 and 20%. Hopefully you'll even increase your score a bit more depending on how much time you put into it. But kids who never take those classes, kids who are maybe from a lower socioeconomic area, they're disadvantaged once again. They've been disadvantaged, from day one practically, and this was one more piece of that puzzle. And of course I was doing that because I had, young children at home, and I needed to use my education whatever way I could to work off hours, evenings and weekends. So maybe I've gone off on a tangent there.
No, not at all. My wheels are just turning because I know on the one hand, there's been a large push for programs like Teach for America and a lot of different programs aimed at closing the achievement gap. And they really insisted that, poor kids, Black kids, they can do math too. We need to make it happen. So a lot of people see a lack of a push for whether it's minority children or poorer children. A lot of them say if you're not requiring them to take math, then that is, a sign of prejudice in and of itself. But then on the other hand, a lot of people say, it may not even be an issue of aptitude. It might just be an issue of it not being relevant or interesting. So why not offer those students something different? So I can hear the different kind of debates in my mind. And I'm just thinking about what that looks like, practically speaking. What are your thoughts on that? I know I threw a lot out there.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. You really hit the nail on the head there. Yes, as a matter of fact, oh gosh, it was probably in the late 80s. I know it was before I started teaching. There was a movie that came out called Stand and Deliver, and it was based on the teaching career of a math teacher in, I think, East LA. And he had a lot of minority students, and he really pushed them, and he pushed himself too, to really bring these kids up. And yes, I very much understand that argument. There's another side to that argument. Interestingly, there are the kids who are from very high socioeconomic backgrounds who get pushed, and they, most of the time they do fairly well in classes, but a lot of them are not interested in it. So this desire for us to have all students college ready, that I think really stems from our economic system and the way we have, quote unquote, a meritocracy system, is kind of polluted education to some degree. If we had, if you could go into some kind of work, even if it's just, being a home health care worker and actually earn a livable wage, there are a lot of people who like to care for people, but you're not going to find someone from a high socioeconomic area sending their son or daughter into that field because they know they're not going to earn any money. No, I know you might like this. That's really sweet of you, but you've got to become an RN or a PA. You have to really be angling yourself into a higher earning job. So, but kind of going back to, yes, the Teach for America and all that. So one of the things way back, even before I started teaching and when I was doing my observations, I'll never forget something a teacher told me. And this is the late 80s. This is so many years ago. Funny how some things will stay with you and you can forget a whole year of your life. But anyhow, she said to me, when it comes time for you to get a job, please do yourself a favor and try to get in the highest middle class district you possibly can. And that was so that you would have fewer behavior problems, fewer ditching, kids who had, skills that were, they were ready to go into the next level of math, because math is so sequential. It's, the higher up you go when you do teach in those areas, those types of schools, you find little pockets of things missing. And so it does make your job harder as a teacher. Well, I didn't happen to do that. I did teach in a Title I school, 2 Title I schools for basically the first decade of my career. And let's see, where we live now. So I've worked at kind of at the other end of the spectrum, mostly with the test prep classes, but also my tutoring and substituting, and working with the homeschool kids, that also. So I've really kind of seen the gamut there.
Yeah. And I'm still kind of thinking, and I'm sure this is not going to come out like politically correct at all, but that's okay. So I'm kind of wondering, are you thinking that maybe it's somewhat unrealistic for a lot of students that are in, low socioeconomic status areas to become mathematicians? So are you kind of thinking, why not just give them more practical career paths? That maybe it's not a neurosurgeon, but it's also not working at McDonald's. They could maybe make a middle class wage being a mechanic or working somewhere in the medical field. And why not kind of knock all of the algebra and the calculus and the trigonometry off the table? It's available for people that really do have that interest. But are you saying, why not switch, some of the programs and make it practical so that they can be kind of in a better job than maybe the path that they were on? Because it almost sounds like people are saying, let's have these really high requirements that aren't working out to be realistic. And it sounds good on paper, but it doesn't work. So why not just stop pretending, take that off the table, and really figure out how can we help these students to have a higher trajectory? Am I in the ballpark, or what are you thinking?
Well, it doesn't need to be an all or nothing one way or the other. There needs to be, and this is really how it used to be, I would say. So one of the, bad words in education was tracking. Well, we don't want to track students into business math versus algebra. I get that. I totally get that. But some kids, that's all they want to do is be in business math, and let them be in business math. And I think I think so. I'm going to answer the question, but I think part of the problem is that we really don't have enough hands-on in the classroom with students, counselors, teachers. We have a shortage there. We have too many customers for the workers. So I think we really need to have, counselors will have, 300, 350 students on their caseload. That's not terribly uncommon. And, if you have a good counselor, they will tell a student, hey, you're pretty good at math. You should probably be taking, these advanced classes. Hey, you know what? And if a student comes to the counselor and says, I really hate math. I don't want to be in it. All right, that's okay. We understand. But you still need to know how to work with your decimals, your fractions, your percentages, blah, blah, blah. So you're going to be taking business math. I wish that we had a larger span of math in the schools, in the high schools. Even when I substitute a lot, I'll help kids with their math sometimes. Still, even in this higher socioeconomic area, I am sometimes surprised, like, wow, how do these kids not understand a percentage? Because they're freshmen or sophomores, they should know a percentage, how to work a percentage, what it means. I mean, they know what it means to some degree, but not enough number sense that you should just know without having to rely upon a calculator. They'll even rely upon a calculator sometimes, and a grossly wrong answer will come up, and they don't recognize, it's like, there's no way that could possibly be the right answer. So, but kind of going back to the various schools, I just think that they need to understand just how different students are. And I mean, I know we say it a lot, but then we still try to funnel them into this college-bound track. And, some students might be working construction. Fractions are super important in construction, and no one's going to ask you to factor a trinomial if you're on a construction site. They're going to make sure you understand your 16ths and your eighths and things of that nature. So I wish that we would pull back and offer more variety of classes that are really suited for what people need, not what we have this ideal of.
Yeah, I love that. And I know that I hear it all the time, even just floating around the internet. People talk about, why didn't we learn taxes in school? Why didn't we learn about interest rates and loans and payment plans? And there's so many kinds of practical math that even adults are finding that they have no clue about. And so I totally agree. And I even wonder if maybe we took some of the algebra classes off the table and some of the trigonometry off the table, and we just focused on practical life math, that every student, no matter what track, they had to understand this basic math. Maybe some students could have a feeling of success with math that they were not going to have in some of the other classes. And they might actually find some of the motivation and enjoyment for the higher levels of math. But since there's this giant gap and so many students are missing these foundational math skills, it just piles on year by year. And students learn to hate math, but it may not even be that math was so terrible. It might be the types of math. So I even remember in high school, a lot of times they would say students tend to be either people that love geometry or they love algebra, and they would kind of make room for just the different conceptual types of math. And I found that to be really true, that there was some math that I really enjoyed and other maths that I didn't like at all. So it's a really interesting topic. And I would love to hear you unpack more. I know you mentioned kind of in the email this idea of a permanent underclass related to math education. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Sure. And let me just comment. That was just great what you just said. It's, I wish I had said it. Yeah, I don't think it's any big secret. We have enormous wage disparities in our country right now. It's compared to the Gilded Age and actually compared to worse than the Gilded Age. And so if schools, and I think it's very much unwittingly that they do this, they're not trying to set up kids to fail or anything along those lines, but the schools are reacting to that and they're saying, wow, we can't have these kids work, if you're going to go into a job like home health care or even our teachers' aides are paid next to nothing. I mean, it's ridiculous. And, people who do lawns, people who clean houses, people who clean office buildings. I mean, the list goes on, and people who work at Target and the grocery stores. And I mean, there's, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands, millions of these people working in these extremely low wage jobs. And if we're able to say to them, well, you didn't do so great in school, you didn't go to college, you didn't go get a trade, well, it's just your fault. And no one needs to, go to trade school or college to, be in a hospital pushing a cart in and out of rooms and cleaning bedpans and whatever else goes on in a hospital, or working at Target or working at the grocery store. And so our education system has tried to react to that, and that's all the educational system can do until society at large, I think, makes some changes and says, we do need those people who are driving our groceries to the grocery store and who are stocking the shelves, etc., all these sorts of jobs, and says we have to pay them fairly. Then I think the schools would have a huge burden lifted and they'd say, hey, it's okay. You don't have to know how to derive the quadratic formula. You don't have to get the surface area of this oblique cylinder, whatever it's going to be. You can just, learn some critical thinking skills, become a responsible adult, and life is not going to be bad for you. We can graduate you from our school feeling like there is some hope for you to not, be scraping by and working 2 jobs or whatever.
So is the idea kind of that students are made to feel like because they don't succeed in math, that there's not many options for them? Do you kind of think that that's the message that students are getting, so that they don't kind of apply themselves to like a higher aspiration? Or what do you think about that?
I do think there's a big push for STEM careers. That's the big buzzword. This probably for a decade now almost. And I've known, families, that my children were friends with, oh, we have to open enroll to this school because it has a STEM program. So I do think there is that push. I do think students get very discouraged in math class sometimes, and it can stress them out. I feel terrible for them. I wish they weren't being forced into these classes that not only don't interest them, but maybe it's just a little above their ability, or they're having to spend so much time working in this one area that they are neglecting some things at which they're better. And I think it would be interesting actually to find people. I mean, I don't run around asking, say, 35-year-olds who were in this educational system that did push them to go to college, how they feel about having to have endured what some of the things they had to have endured in high school. One of the schools where I do some substituting and I have a couple friends over at this school is a vocational school. And I do think that a lot of those students are pretty happy with their VOTEC classes. Matter of fact, sometimes when you talk to them, they'll say like, oh yeah, I got to go back to my home school. They don't want to be there so much. Not everyone is academically inclined. And I think as educators or as a society at large, we have to kind of recognize that it isn't for everyone, and let those people live their lives and try to find a path for themselves. Once they become, about 14, 15 years old, they kind of need to start getting in that direction. That K through 8, they're still sort of children. And so perhaps, they're all kind of learning the same things, the reading, the writing, the geography, etc. Arithmetic, the other R there. But once you get to high school, I think a lot more differentiation should come into play. We shouldn't be trying to funnel so many of them on this college track. And I've not enjoyed it when I've had to push some of these students, who really were lacking in basic skills, and it made it so difficult for them. And some of them, at the high school level, kids will just ditch, they fail, they give up sometimes. And that doesn't set, that's hard on the families too. No one, no student wants to bring the report card home or gets mailed home. However, they're getting report cards these days, and they have an F or a D in math, and the parents, why aren't you trying harder? Da 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 da. And I think that schools maybe need to look a bit differently at that, And it isn't always just laziness. I mean, some kids just really struggle.
Definitely. And this is going on a slightly different path, but I'm just curious, what do you think about some of the changes you've seen in the way math is taught over these past 35 years? Because I know that there's been tons of debate about Common Core math and getting away from standard algorithms and repetition and memorization and moving to more, pictorial math and some of those things. So I'm curious what you think about that.
I was kind of fortunate. I think that I missed Common Core. I was doing other things at the time. One of the things I've noticed, schools are kind of moving away from textbooks or only online textbooks. I created all my materials, and I think that's not a good way to run a math program. And I see with some of my tutoring students how they don't have textbooks frequently. They have packets for this unit and packets for that unit. And I'm not going to say that's terrible, but I think that I actually brought a book with me. Here's a pre-calculus textbook, and you can see how fat it is. And I won't delve into it too much, but the number of authors who are on it, I counted a week or two ago. There's over a dozen authors, there's editors. There's a lot that goes into writing a textbook. And for some reason, we're moving away from textbooks. And I really think it's in reaction to the number of students who do struggle with math. So we're my general sense is we're jumping from this program to that program, to this idea, to that idea, in some hopes of finding some silver bullet. And it really isn't there, Not everyone is going to just excel at algebra. I mean, math is pretty unchanging. You could go and grab a textbook from 40 or 50 years ago, and it would work just as well today as it did then. So I do feel like there's always a new program coming along, and I don't think that's just math. I hear it from other areas also.
So I would love to ask you what your opinion is regarding administration. There's been a lot of debates lately about admin. Did you find them helpful as a teacher? Were they supportive? Or do you feel like there's just way too many admins in the world?
Let me jot this down. I will before I answer that, not that I don't want to answer, but one thing I have noticed, and it's because I've sort of been one of these people, is that there are a lot of people who work in education who really don't see students at all, because there's so much publication of test materials. There's so many consulting firms that will come in. So are there too many admin? I think there might be too many people who work in education who actually don't work with students. I would say that for the most part, my administration has been very nice. But most of my teaching career took place in the 90s. So I think things have probably changed. Um, I think that there's a lot of pressure with test scores. There's school ratings. Sadly, these test scores and school ratings correlate more highly with socioeconomic areas than programs or anything. You know what I'm saying? So I think administrators are under a lot of pressure. And then that pressure gets pushed down onto teachers. And if they're not happy with their test scores, well, we have to try this. I've been in some teacher in service things. When I first started teaching, I think once a month we had a department meeting, and once a month we had a faculty meeting. I had 2 meetings a month. I did go back to teaching in 2019, and I was part of what were we called now? Well, we were like a team of teachers. We were supposed to meet like 3 days a week. Our department was meeting once a week. We would have a lot of staff meetings. We would have a lot of in-service trainings, and it felt like your professional judgment was sort of like out the window. You know, you had to be kind of micromanaged. I sometimes felt like. I don't think that the administration wants to micromanage you. I just think they just don't know what else to do. They're just so busy trying to see test scores improve. They're just jumping through whatever hoops they can find and then pushing it down on you. Another thing I wanted to get back to, how teaching has changed. Of course, there's a lot of computer usage. And one of the programs I worked in when I was teaching remotely for the post-pandemic position was involve students using a program that was fairly self-paced. And for math, I kind of like having an element of that computer usage, whether it's Khan Academy, there's a lot of them, Math IXL, there's just a lot of them out there. And having all the videos that at the students' fingertips, because, you know, even for students who are advanced and like math, sometimes they're a little stuck, and they can go and they can repeat a lesson, say, they can find something online to watch it taught again. They can get some extra practice that way. They don't have to feel like they're embarrassed in a classroom or around anyone. So I do think to some degree it's really helpful for students to have some of that rote, and that was another thing you mentioned, where you just have to practice and practice. You know, I mean, you don't get better at procedural things unless you practice them. You know, some people it comes more quickly than others. So I do like that aspect from what has changed from the 90s, that the kids can go in and really hone in on a skill till they get it. I mean, that's provided that they want to do it and they have the time and space to do it.
That makes sense. I do remember taking one college class my freshman year of college, and it was completely computer driven. And this was in 2005, but I actually ended up really loving it. And I know it's not for everybody, but I thought it was amazing. I could go at my own pace and, like you said, do extra practice exercises. And I'm also kind of curious, what are your thoughts about school in general as a whole? There are a lot of people that are starting to advocate for different kinds of schooling. Or do you have any thoughts about that at all?
Oh gosh, of course. What teacher doesn't? So I'll just comment, you know, you have to take classes to keep your certificate up to date. So one of the classes I took, I don't remember what it was called, but they discussed how schools are compared to prisons. And it's sort of true, you know, can I use the restroom? Yes, you need to sign out. Here's your pass, take the pass, whatever it may be. And you have to do that. You simply have to do that because, you know, they used to use the word parente loci or something like that. You know, we're responsible for the students. We need to know where they are. I tend to think that the school day is too long, you know, especially for smaller kids. For younger kids, and because I do get around substituting, I see all ages, not just high school. I do think some of those classrooms with young kids really need to be like 16 and under, 16 students. They should not be such large classrooms. Um, with these little kids, I wish, and I'm not an elementary educator, but I get the feeling that they probably need more breaks during the day. Even at the high school level, your brain is tired. When you go to, say 7 classes, 7 50 or 55-minute classes, you have a little 5-minute break, then you have a lunch. It's a lot. And of course, they have young brains, so they can absorb a lot. But I think that it's very regimented and maybe too regimented. I think we'd be better off if we had perhaps a shorter school day and maybe more days of school to sort of make up for the time. Time's a big thing. I open enrolled my oldest daughter. 2 of my kids actually went to a high school that had block classes because that meant that they only took 4 classes a day versus 7. So I kind of like that model, but what I've sort of discovered over the years is that model is sometimes used at schools so that the teachers can teach more students. So a high school teacher would normally teach 5 classes, now is teaching 6. I do think the workload for most people in education is very heavy. I think it's a very heavy workload. And it's only become heavier as the years have gone by because of, say, increased meetings. I think the ability of people being able to email you at any time of day adds to teachers' workload. So I really see why a lot of people are shying away from the profession. My oldest daughter and her fiance are both school teachers. And I remember her first year, her telling me that, she was just working about 60 hours a week. And on the weekends, she would just like sleep a lot, And I thought, oh gosh, and her fiance, he's going to change schools at the end of this year because at one point in time this year, he had over 200 students. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how it's going to change, but I hope it does eventually because it's too important. It's just too important. I've often said that I feel like we treat raising children like an expensive hobby for parents, and then we kind of shutter them at schools to give those parents a break, and it's not really a break, they're just going to work. So yeah, maybe I have some sort of I don't know, not well received ideas by some people.
Oh, I think everything you're saying is totally relatable and understandable. And I'm kind of curious. I tend to like to ask people, if you had a magic wand and you could change anything in education, what would you personally change?
Well, I think for those lower grades, I think you need to have fewer students in those lower grades. And I think probably every classroom for the demands that are made right now needs to have a teacher's aide also. There need to be 2 people in the classroom. Yeah, I think those would be 2 big things in shortening the school day, but maybe, year-round school gets tossed around. I actually worked in a school years ago that was year-round. So you'd go like 9 weeks and have a couple weeks off. And so the summer is much shorter, but you could probably maybe not completely go year-round, I'm not sure, but just to get in the number of hours that are, often required. I don't know how much they're needed because there is so much time that is kind of wasted in schools. I think it'd be better to have shorter school days and just more of those school days, maybe 200 school days that are only 5 hours long.
Definitely. And I meant to ask you this earlier, but I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts about what teachers should do if they are teaching, let's say, an Algebra 1 class and they're finding that more than half of their students don't have the basics? I know that when I was in the classroom, there was always a debate because sometimes administration would say that you have to teach grade level curriculum. We don't have time to go back. And then a lot of teachers would say, well, we can't possibly do that if our students are still struggling with division and multiplication and addition. And there is that endless tussle. So I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts about that?
I think that's a good place where having online education could help a lot because the students could be plugged in. Now, this takes a lot of time for the teacher to set that up. And I think one word that doesn't happen, that isn't said enough in education, is no. So maybe the teachers need to band together and say, no, we can't do this because of these reasons. The students aren't up to grade level. They need to be, they need remediation. And then, of course, if you say that to your administration, they'll say, okay, go ahead and do the remediation. We want you to do the remediation. But then you have to say, no, I don't have time to do the remediation because I'm in class all day and blah, blah, blah. So I think we have to say, I wish there could be some analysis done some point in time of all the tasks that a teacher is asked to do in a day and how much time it should take to do it. I don't think it'd be a pretty number. So I really think that the teachers need to push back on the administration needs to push back on the school board, there needs to be some pushback because you can't ask someone to do something and not give them the time or the resources to do it. And I think that happens too often in education. Like I said at the beginning of the interview, when I was teaching the Algebra 1 to all the kids, we were allowed to give them a grade for general math or pre-algebra, algebra. So we were able sort of to wiggle out of that, versus just failing a student. But yeah, it's important that they have those basic skills, and there needs to be some way to get them. One of the things that does get done at the secondary level with math is that students are sometimes given an additional math class. They call it a support class, an academic support class. Kids don't like those classes too much because they're labeled as the, not smart kids. And then they're just continuing to do that which they have struggled with. And so, some people I think can make it work pretty well to try to make it sort of fun for the kids. But I think this kind of goes back at that elementary level, get much, much smaller classes. And I think you can do a lot more with the kids, hopefully.
Yeah. And you made me think about the whole topic of passing versus failing. And that's been coming up so much because a lot of schools are moving toward a no failure system. And they might have something called standards-based grades. So maybe they might get a W, which means working toward, and maybe they might get an N, which might mean needs improvement, but they keep passing no matter what. And I think what that's doing, even if they had good intentions, is it's covering the massive lack of skills that students have, and they're just kind of carrying them on from year to year. So I'm curious, do you think at any point in a child's education that there is a point at which they should fail if they can't master certain mathematics basics?
I don't know. I think that this has gone on forever. I don't think it's really anything new. I think that I see where the schools are coming from. You don't want, a 14-year-old fifth grader in your school. I think that maybe we just need to kind of stop focusing so much on, gee, they all have to be doing great, I think that's a huge, huge focus. And I think we kind of need to accept that not everyone is super academically inclined, and let's do as much as we can for them. Maybe the parents or the student might at some point in time say, oh, I don't want to go to sixth grade because I don't understand anything. Well, then I don't know. That's pretty loosey-goosey. But I think we maybe focused a little too much on academics sometimes, and there's a lot to be said. One of the things that schools are supposed to do is help kids learn how to, work with one another, share, be neat, be considerate. And maybe we ought to think more along those lines sometimes and just reconcile the fact that, we do have people in our society who are not super academic, who maybe are just going to, I don't know who the man is who drives my garbage truck, but I'm grateful that he is there on Wednesdays picking up everything. And you don't need to even really be able to do fractions to do that job. And let's be grateful for those people and let's pay them appropriately and not push ourselves into some corner of academics are the only thing in life. There's a lot more in life than that. So that's kind of how my probably not so popular opinion is.
I think it's a really fascinating perspective because I think, especially for teachers, we're kind of taught that our job is to make everybody reach certain minimum standards. And we're seeing right now, for whatever reason, most students aren't reaching these minimum standards. So we either have to go back to the drawing board and ask, are these the wrong standards to begin with? Are they unrealistic to begin with? Or I think we need to ask, why are students not able to reach these minimum standards now if they were in the past? And I think that's the hardest thing that people have been grappling with.
There probably is some subsection of students who aren't. And I'll kind of pull this back perhaps to what goes on before the kids ever get to school. For literally hundreds of years, infants and young children were just in a home setting. They weren't, some of them were in orphanages, but they were mostly in small settings, and they were with the same adults all the time. And so that helps a child develop trust. And I think that some of what goes on in, some students, some children's very early lives is a little bit chaotic. And so I think there are neuroscientists studying this now, are all those neurotransmitters, developing the way they should, because there's been an environment that the child can thrive in. That 0 to 3 is just known to be very important for brain development. So, and this is, I think, to some degree where low socioeconomics comes into play. When parents are stressed, they can't give their kids what they need. It's difficult because maybe they're working a couple different jobs. The McKinney-Vento, that's what we call it here for homeless students. And there have always been students like this in the world, or children like this in the world. And thank goodness, we're in the 21st century. We're trying to get them into school. We're trying to teach them everything that we can. But teachers aren't there from 0 to 3. Teachers aren't making sure that there's, nutritious food in the house. So there are a lot of stresses within our society that once again come back to those socioeconomic things. So I think that plays a bigger role in it than we really want to admit. We don't like to bring that subject up,
It's true. And I'm in a lifespan development psychology course right now, and it was really interesting and sad to learn that children of lower socioeconomic status homes have a much lower IQ. And it's not because they're stupid, but like you said, there's so many building blocks that maybe are just not getting formed when they should. And so I do think it's so hard for teachers because on the one hand, I do think there's been some schools that have been able to create huge academic progress for students from really, really tough environments. So we know at least theoretically it's possible. But on the other hand, there does have to be a degree of buy-in from the students and from their parents and somewhat even from the community to support the amount of work it takes to catch up and to even exceed standards when there's so many gaps. And so there's just so many questions kind of going through my mind because maybe the idealistic part of me doesn't want to give up those high standards. In my mind, I want to say that, yes, these students absolutely can reach those standards, but I do think the amount of work is so huge, the amount of hours upon hours it takes to catch up. I've seen that too. I know what that looks like. And so I love the idea of trying to bridge that gap on the one hand by saying, are there other types of math and other types of classes and other types of career paths for these individuals that are struggling or they're behind or they're missing foundational pieces? But there's another part of me that wants to figure out how can we help the students that with enough time and with enough focus really could reach those standards. And I don't think there's any easy answers to that, sadly.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, You know, I think there's that old quote, schools are a reflection of society. So I mean, society's first and the school is the secondary. It's the reflection. So I think until we see more changes in society, we're going to see a lot of these problems continue. And they were there 50, 60, 80, 100 years ago, but no one was measuring them the way they are now. And people were just accepting the fact, okay, I mean, oh my gosh, we have so many of my like grandparents and their brothers and sisters and whatnot. You know, they just worked in the factories, you know. I mean, I think only one of my four grandparents even finished high school. And so it was, and I'm not trying to say we should be going back to that, but we have a very different standard now, but we haven't put in place some of the pieces for that standard to be met, I think, you know, and we've strained families a lot. I think many families feel stretched very thin. Even, you know, we live in a fairly high socioeconomic area where I am, but there are a lot of families that are stressed and running. And of course, they, to some degree, they do that to themselves because the kids are in soccer and this and that. But when you go even to a lower socioeconomic area, then the stresses are even greater, and then it comes in it, the kids feel it along the way. So you know, we have high ideals, and I think we should continue to have high ideals, but I go back to that, you know, schools need to say no, teachers need to say no. You want this? Yes, I'm happy to do it, but you need to give me what I need to get it done. Sometimes I feel like schools are a little bit like assembly lines, you know, where you wouldn't say to someone, say a car assembly line, okay, well, we're making Jeeps. Oh, and we're going to throw, and now you need to make a Corvette. And we're just, you know, you have to do a lot of prep work before you're going to start making the Corvette on the Jeep line, or something silly like that. But, you know, we need to start saying no, I think, and start delineating, well, okay, that's great. You want that. Then I think we also need these pieces in play. Do you have the funding? Are you going to figure out some way to make this work? So
Definitely. Well, this has been a super fascinating conversation, and I just have so many questions and ideas brewing. But I'm curious, what do you wish if you could just be a national spokesperson for all mathematics teachers? What do you wish society knew and understood about a math teacher's role? And this could include administrators, lawmakers, parents, it can include anyone.
math is just one of many academic areas, and not everyone's going to like it and not everyone's going to be good at it, but that's okay. I mean, we need a lot of different people to work and to live in our society, to make our society work. And we wouldn't want them all to be nothing but, you know, math nerds. We want a lot of different skills, and to appreciate that people are born with different skills, and to try to develop what each student has. I think that whatever the ratio is, maybe there's only, you know, 30% of the people are good at math. That's all that this world needs, is 30% of the people to be good at math. Maybe 40% of the people need to be really good at, you know, verbal communication. And then let's really focus in on that. So it's not the all and end all.
I love that. And I think that that would be a relief to a lot of people, because I'll go ahead and admit I don't identify as a super mathematician. In fact, a lot of times I've dreaded my math classes, but I would like to think that I have other talents somewhere. So it is a relief to know that your math ability is not the final grade on your life potential or even on your worth, because I think a lot of people do tend to feel stupid when they don't succeed at math, and that is not true. So thank you for reminding us of that, Tina. And I think your message will relate to so many people. So thank you so much, Tina. And audience, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give us a comment, share your thoughts in the comment section. And if you would like to interview with me, you can email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. We'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.